The agenda this week sat down with MPP Lisa MacLeod about her struggles with mental health, got a primer on Canadian tax policy, and considered the persistence of antisemitism. The Agenda's Week in Review begins at this week's Rural Ontario Municipal Association's annual conference with ideas on how to deal with homelessness and acute housing needs in smaller centres around the province.
In terms of individuals experiencing homelessness, I'm sure many have heard the stats or the costs. You're spending anywhere from $90,000 to $200,000 per person per year that's on the street. Or you can spend a third of that, a quarter of that, possibly even a tenth of that on providing the basic needs of an individual. We went from having a little bit of pushback in that town to 3 months after we were opened. The OPP, the superintendent of Northwestern Ontario, was calling us, telling us that calls were down 90%, that ambulances weren't going to the hospital with people who needed a prescription for housing. And then we had the local taxpayers federation saying, you guys are saving us money on OPP and ambulance billbacks. So we know this works. You either invest in preventative measures or you pay a whole lot more in reactive measures. So that's one from a local perspective. Second, from an international perspective, and I have no connection to Scotiabank here, but if you have the time, read the report they released last week. They're calling, this is a big five bank, calling on Canada to double the amount of social housing that we have in this country. We are presently at half the level of social housing as our other G7 counterparts. Scotiabank is now saying, and this is where it's more powerful, right? Where everyone in this room knows that housing is the solution to homelessness. Housing is the solution to getting people off of the street. Now when we have a big five bank in Canada, economists saying it is much cheaper for governments in the long run to invest in housing because they're saying, which we know, market economics 101, supply and demand, it does not provide, markets do not provide housing for everyone. It provides housing for those who are willing and able to pay that price. But it invariably leads to, quote, market failures, textbook term. That means that not everyone will be served by the market. Scotiabank is saying it's cheaper for governments to invest in social housing than not over the long run. So we need to make those partnerships with people that, and organizations that maybe we haven't in the past. But so when you get this sort of, this push at the municipal level saying we need to invest better, we need to be proactive in our investments, we need to take care of people first and foremost. And then to Brenda's point about the financial side, when you get Bay Street economists saying housing makes sense, do it, why aren't we doing it? Let's do it.
There's your consensus. Let's, Marilyn, I am told that municipalities in the province of Ontario have a lot more responsibilities and carriage of the housing issue than, say, other municipalities in other provinces in Canada. And I guess I want to know from you if that's a blessing or a curse.
To me, anything that devolves power and control down to a community is a blessing. But that said, I mean, there's lots been spoken to about the need for partnerships across different levels of government. And what I really want to say in response to my colleagues is that the financialization of housing in Canada is a system. We have a system of how you own a home and whether you can rent a home, whether in fact you're in social housing. That's a financial system. And when you look for innovation at a systems level, I know when our group, as a collaborative group of municipal councillors and housing advocates and nonprofits and business, people said, when do we put the shovel in the ground? Let's get the shovel in the ground. And in innovation process, it's about stopping and understanding what the interventions are in the system that makes the difference. So we have in Ontario, just in Ontario, a system that is designed to create exactly the results we've got. It can't do anything else. It has produced what we built that system to do, and it has failed. It has failed. And the fallout from that failure will be enormously felt at the community level. And so it's really interesting, in our work we found it just fascinating to think, what is the leverage of a municipality? How do we bring collaboration to bear, municipality by municipality and between municipalities, as well as across other levels of government? Because that's where that's where we live, and that's where the fallout is.
Brian, can I check that line with you? We have a system that has failed. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, especially if we focus on just the capital side alone. And for the points I made earlier, across much of rural Ontario, housing was built based on an ideology. Like we had, heavy immigration in the mid-1900s, and it was a goal of people to own their plot of land, single detached home, be able to cut their grass, suburbs expanded. And that system no longer is what is required in Ontario at large. And it's very difficult to work within that. I mean, we've seen the initiatives recently, right, about secondary suites, zoning changes. I mean, you got to wonder what that looks like 5-10 years from now when we build that capacity inside our existing system. So I would agree with that. And I'd extend the point to say that when we're talking about homelessness, there's a part of the system that we don't acknowledge, and that is, to Brenda's point, about the supports that have to be in place. And it's difficult across all of Northern Ontario to deliver those supports through a system that's already struggling through capacity problems.
Can I follow up on that? There are people in the South here who, on a routine basis, stumble across homeless people in their daily lives. You can walk outside this very hotel and run into it. And it's, well, I hope it's still considered shocking for people to see this. I'd hate for people to be inured by this. But people down south may not think that kind of homelessness exists in the north. Does it?
It didn't. And within the last 10 years, we never thought on the streets of Hearst or Timmins that we would see people on the streets at minus 30 degrees. But it is happening. It is happening tonight. And the emergency shelters that we put in place don't have the capacity to deal with it. And an emergency shelter is no kind of solution. I mean, it's a solution to save somebody's life tonight if they choose to stay in the shelter. But, I mean, most of rural Ontario is not equipped, even though we received some modest funding from the province to be able to deliver emergency supports. That's not the kind of support that's going to end homelessness. And until, I say this with some experience, until ending homelessness becomes a priority for education, healthcare, Solicitor General, we will be chasing it. 99%, if not 100% of our homelessness strategies are reactive. It's to what's happening on the street tonight. No one is thinking about early childhood education, parenting programs, nutrition programs, what to do to keep the youth that are in First Nations from becoming addicted and then on the streets in our municipalities. So, I mean, at the risk of taking up the next 38 minutes, I mean, I could talk about what needs to happen in the relationship between First Nations and municipalities and how the province and the feds continue to block that relationship. But
it really
maybe
is,
another time.
Well, it really is a case of, you pay me now or you can pay me later.
Right.
And if you pay me later, you're going to pay a lot more. In Lennox and Addington, do you have a homelessness problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of our rural areas do.
What does it look like?
It looks in some of the more, I'll say, urban, like in the town setting. We have a shelter in Napanee, for example, Morning Star Mission. They're doing a great job. It's sort of a warming center, but now it's become more of a shelter. But there's a lot of folks that are just sleeping coach to coach or staying in abusive relationships because they have no place to go, or undesirable situations because they have no choices. And I worry that it exacerbates their addiction issues because for some of them, showing up with a bottle of booze is their way they get to sleep on somebody's couch. You know, like it's a cycle. You need housing to support mental health and addictions supports, but you need mental health and addiction supports so that someone can maintain their housing so that they don't get evicted. I worry that some communities think, and some residents think, oh, a shelter, that's going to solve everything. Shelter's not going to solve much of anything because the very conditions that make you homeless in the first place, the mental health and addictions issues that make you homeless, are the same conditions that prevent you from even entering a shelter. Like, for example, you can't take drugs into a shelter, and if you're not willing to part with your drugs at the door, you don't want to walk through the door. Or if your mental health conditions require, like, you have a machete or a club and it goes wherever you go, you can't bring a weapon into the shelter. Those people are still on the street, and then our taxpayers say, oh, you're not doing enough, they're still homeless on the street, the shelter must be, overcrowded. Well, no, it's just those people can't see themselves to get through that door. We need to provide the support so that they can support them, so that they can then access the supports that we want to provide.
Let's go back. At what point did you start to think to yourself, Lisa, something is wrong and I need some help?
Well, truthfully be told, I think it was probably during the minority parliament between 2011 and 2014. And the only reason I say that now is I recognize I was losing my hair. And I was probably in a state of mania, but I definitely knew between 2014 and 2016 I was dealing with depression. And then in my first year as a minister in government, taking on a number of complex files that were very controversial.
Autism.
It ended me up visiting the Ottawa hospital and getting in touch with a psychiatrist and dealing with a whole host of issues, which I'm still dealing with now. Having said that, after a couple of years, and in particular dealing with a very serious crisis during the election, it was really high time that I had to understand exactly what I have. I knew it wasn't unipolar depression. I knew it couldn't just be attributed to some of the trauma from round-the-clock police protection. My mood wasn't stable, and I had some very serious self-harm thoughts. So that's when, working with, honestly, a team, my family physician, my family, some very people that are close to me, a psychiatrist, understood that, I'm bipolar. Or as Frank Sinatra would say, 18-karat manic depressive.
You're always allowed to quote Frank Sinatra on this show.
Okay, thank you. And so then I just thought, okay, here we are. I've got a diagnosis now. This magic pill, whatever they're going to give me, in my case, lithium, is just going to cure me. And then it doesn't work either, because, you have to, it really is a cocktail that works for you and only you. It wouldn't work what works for me, for you. And so over the last several months, it's been trying to find that right, prescription or cocktail or medicine and quantity that will stabilize me and put me on the path to success.
The convention, it's interesting is the wrong word. Unexpected, maybe. It's unexpected, I think, for people who watch Queen's Park to think that you would be going through this, because you've always been considered one of the toughest customers down there, right? You really bring it during question period, and you are a tremendous performer. And I'm wondering, at some point, did you say to yourself, damn it all, I'm Lisa MacLeod. I can't be going through this. I'm one tough customer.
Well, look, I have to be very honest. I'm very angry that I have to deal with this, because I told you I may cry, but, I didn't get elected in 2006 at 31 years old and say, oh, on my bingo card, I'm going to have a massive meltdown and, end up in hospitals trying to figure out what I have. Simply didn't. I really enjoyed my time in the cabinet. I enjoyed my time in the front bench in opposition. I love being at community events, but some days I can't get out of bed. And, that's really tough. And can you imagine, the worst nightmare for a politician, especially when you're going into your 6th campaign? You're actually in the middle of an election campaign with your psychiatrist taking layers of you away and trying to depoliticize you as a politician. And that's what happened to me, for my own health and safety and for the well-being of my family, was going through the last 2 weeks of that election campaign, learning how not to be a politician while I was competing to keep my job. It was hard. And then, of course, you have all the noise around you, right? The social media, and then you're not responding to media. And so everything just starts to become this big pile and this big mountain that is a burden on you, and you don't really know what the heck is going on. And we were still going, so you can't really tell anybody because you're still trying to figure out what is really wrong with me. And
Do you think you know now?
yeah, I mean, I think the diagnosis has been extremely helpful in the sense that I can see people who've succeeded with having the same diagnosis. I can see that there's a path forward with medication and therapy. So I think that that's helpful. But there's a lot of uncertainty.
30 years since the Supreme Court case of Symes versus Canada. What was that case about?
In some ways, it's a case about business deductions and what's a permissible business deduction. The meat of the case, though, is that it's about a lawyer who went to the Supreme Court arguing that her childcare expenses should be deductible from her business expenses. That's groundbreaking because before that, no one had ever really tried to litigate this issue and think about whether or not childcare expenses are a valid business deduction. Children and business don't always mix, so maybe I'll take a step back and explain why that might make sense.
Sure.
She was a lawyer, a partner at a law firm, and she argued that she could not be a partner at a law firm. She couldn't go to her job, she couldn't run this business without actually having a nanny at home to care for her children.
Who was therefore a legitimate business expense.
And that was her argument. So the test is, is this something that is connected with your business and does it allow you to make a profit from your business? And so she argued, without this nanny, I could not have gone to work. I could not have been a lawyer and I couldn't continue to run a business and earn income from my business, so it should be deductible.
What did the court say about that?
There were, at the time, as now, there were 9 judges on the Supreme Court, 7 men, 2 women. The men said it should not be deductible. The women said it should.
No kidding.
And so that's the law today.
That's still the law today?
Yes, courts have held that childcare expenses are not legitimate business deductions, except to the extent that you get a small childcare credit, whether or not you're an employee or a business owner, but you don't get to deduct a nanny's salary, which would be a substantial part of your income.
Let me do a little speculation here. There was a time not that long ago, we had 4 women and 5 men on the court, and the Chief Justice was female. Nobody thought about taking a new case before the court on this, given that change in demographic?
I mean, maybe that case would have been decided differently today, partly because, we recognize for a lot of other types of expenses that there are personal elements and business elements. And so to the extent that there's a personal element, we often look at it in the context of how much does it relate to your business. So maybe it would have been decided differently today.
What people are often talking about when they talk about, is there a distinction between anti-Zionism and antisemitism in terms of the experience of people who are going through this? When a 15-year-old girl posts Shabbat Shalom on TikTok and then is flooded with trolls yelling, #FreePalestine, you bitch, there's nothing in that exchange that has anything at all to do with an actual place called Israel. And yet somehow we feel obligated to pretend that it does. And there's, when a synagogue is spray painted, Zionist pigs, somehow we have to pretend that that's a conversation about Israel. To me, there's just a very clear distinction between criticism of Israel, which is something all of us do for all of our countries, wherever we live, and demonization of a group of people. One looks like a conversation in a seminar room, and the other looks like throwing bottles at someone's head. And I don't really understand why we feel obligated to pretend that those two things are the same.
Derek in Munich, do you want to come back on that?
I don't think we are. Anybody in their right mind would say they're the same. And I'm not talking about discussions in seminar rooms. I'm talking about very heated conversations that could happen really anywhere in society, very heated conversations about Israel, where people can have quite legitimate reasons to be extremely upset, even angry at Israel. And remember that angry speech, emotional speech about a country is permitted speech. And what's happening with that poor 15-year-old girl is that she's being set upon thanks to the horrible technological innovations of social media. where a relatively small number of people can do tremendous damage. And of course, all the more so with the synagogue that gets vandalized or firebombed, or the horrible shootings that have happened in synagogues in the United States and elsewhere in the world. These are perpetrated by a very small number of people, but the multiplier effect of their actions is enormous. Obviously, what these people are doing is hateful, anti-Semitic, and criminal. There's no question about it. The question is, what do we do about the language about Israel, which is admittedly at times intemperate and unfair? People have a right to be prejudiced in that sense. People have a right to focus on certain parts of the world more than others. That's just, I mean, we simply can't pay attention to all social evils equally. But what we have to then understand that this is not a matter of academic conversation versus everything else. This is a question of conversation in the public sphere everywhere about Israel. And when people can say quite negative or even nasty things about Israel, and they aren't immediately tarred as hating Jews.
I think we could do several follow-ups on this angle here, but I'm mindful of the clock and the other things that I think we still need to get to, so I'm going to move on. And Robert Jan, bring you in on this. And again, I want to go back to the ADL study. Around 20% of Americans believe that Jews have too much power and influence. And I wonder if you believe, and again, a bit of an odd question, but here we go, are Jews too visible in some aspects of society for their own good?
You know, which Jews? That's the first question, of course. It's very clear that because of let's first of all the idea that Hollywood is dominated by Jews. You know, in some way Hollywood has become the big machine that not only represents America to itself, but also that represents America to the rest of the world. And it's historically true that because of a number of historical confluence of different facts that Jews had at a certain moment and continue to have, individual Jews, that they have quite important impact on basically the goings on in that town. But the question, of course, is, do they do this as Jews? I mean, are they connected to some kind of, central agency that tells them what to think or what to do? And I think that, the basic thing that's always said about Jews, you have two Jews and three opinions. That it's probably the least unified people in terms of opinions, and we can see this right now in this very conversation. That there's an incredible amount of disagreement and variety. And that is also what Hollywood shows. I don't think that the fact that a number of important people like Spielberg and so on, they self-identify as Jews, are powerful, are influential in Hollywood, that results in a kind of Jewish agenda, sorry for using this word, being imposed on the American people.
And that's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, that's twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.